Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Grappling Growth podcast with me, Joe Testori. On episode 34, I was joined by Christian Chalfont. He is the founder of Men's Retreats UK and also a counsellor. Christian became counsellor in 2019 and he took about 8 months off work beforehand to find his purpose. In that time, he also went on to start a men's retreats business where they are currently raising investment and they are looking to make it a hub and a community for men to come from all backgrounds, ethnicities, sexualities, to come to one place and build a tribe amongst men. Christian was a guy who I met about a week ago. I went over to a friend's podcast, a guy called Conrad Edmantis and Rupert Avery. We sat down, listened to their podcast, Triangle Theory, and I could just see the energy that Christian gave off. He is one of the most confident guys I've heard speak. He has gone through traumas. He has had to question his identity and figure out who exactly he wants to be. He has found alignment on his purpose now. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was hardly about business. We spoke about what 10 subjects he would put on the curriculum for students right now, what it was like in his 20s partying and just going out pretty much. His 30s were filled with his activities to grow his money, and now he's focused on business. And I think this conversation goes in many different directions. He openly speaks about coming out as gay when he was 12 years old and how much he had to kind of play with his identity to figure out how that would look, talking about being bullied when he was at school. And as someone myself who was bullied at school, that was something that touched upon me. So I really respected this conversation. Christian is a really cool guy, and I hope you get something out of this. Have a great day, and thank you so much for listening to these podcasts. Take care. As entrepreneurs, we all experience challenges in our business journey. I'm Joe Testori, and the Grappling Growth podcast is my attempt at documenting my entrepreneurial journey while building my brands. I sit down with fellow entrepreneurs, understanding how they grapple with growth. I hope you find value and enjoy. Christian, lovely to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. My opening question for you is, what does growth look like to you?
Yeah, so for me, it's the ability to reflect and be self-aware on the position I am in life and what I'm doing to move myself forward.
If you were to expand on that, what else would you say to that point?
So being in a growth mindset, being willing to learn all the time. How do we take feedback? How do we take rejection? How do we take failure? Each of these things are learning points that we can utilize to move us forward on our journey, or we can become bogged down with them and let them hinder us.
That's an explanation that I haven't had on the podcast before. We've had some really interesting ones, and I think that reflects nicely upon your background and experience. So we met, it was 8 days ago actually, through Conrad and Rupert at the Triangle Theory studio, and I think what gravitated me towards you and just your approach and everything was just the way how you viewed things and how I can tell evidently, and I can tell people who have done a lot of self-work, the process of self-work for you, when do you think you really started to look at that self-work?
Yeah, I'd say probably about 5 years ago. Yeah, so when I started my journey to becoming a counselor and a psychotherapist, you are forced to look at yourself in a very deep way. You're really shining a light into all the darkest corners of yourself, looking at your relationships, your thought processes, your inner beliefs, your values, how you show up in any given situation. It really forces you to take radical accountability for who you are. You stop looking outwards, stop blaming other people, and you start realizing actually the only thing that I can really control is myself. What I'm doing, how I'm showing up, and the person that I'm being. And once you start making that change and accepting that about yourself and about life, then real growth can then start to happen.
Why do you think so many men struggle to go to therapy? Is my question.
I think there's a lot of stigma, around what it means to be a man. All these narratives around masculinity, we see it all the time in social media, in the news around toxic masculinity, the different stereotypes of what a man is. If it's the Homer Simpson type, who's just this lovable idiot, not got much about him. Is it somebody who's really dominating and aggressive? Is it, the psychopaths that you see out there? I think for men accessing counseling, it's perceived as a potential weakness, that they can't figure something out by themselves and that they need additional support from other people. And ultimately we are hardwired for community and for tribe. We're not meant to succeed alone. That's just this narrative that's happened as we've grown as a species.
Why do you think there's this shift in narrative to men feeling as though they have to be alpha, they have to succeed alone, as you said there?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it comes down, I think, to culture, society, religion, family values. This idea that a man has to be stoic, he has to be the provider for his families, the main earner. I think that feeds a lot into what it means to be a man, to look a certain way physically, to be sporting, to be somebody who's dominant. All these different ideas as to what it means to have a certain status in society, in family, to be seen to be hitting those road marks through life, marriage, jobs, car, a certain size of house, it's all these status symbols, and they can really be in conflict sometimes with who we actually are and what we actually want in life.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the points you've raised here, I definitely feel I've gone through a journey through them, i.e., seeing a therapist. As I
Mm.
mentioned, my mum's a therapist herself, and admittedly, I would say I saw it as a bit of taboo, as a stigma, and for exactly to your point, as a man, I don't need a therapist. I'm strong
Mm.
enough. I can battle with my own demons, internal thoughts, and dilemmas. And only at the start of this year did I start seeing a therapist. And admittedly, I'm not seeing one now, but I do think it's a process that I need to go through again. But it takes a real strong man to turn around and say, I need additional help. And it doesn't even need to be help, but it could just be a sounding board. And I can't remember the exact point you made about a therapist, but you mentioned similarly to it was, I'm not here to answer your questions. I'm just here to ask you the questions and put a mirror to your
Mm.
face. The therapist isn't there to do the work for you. You're there to do the work for yourself, and you're there to
Yeah.
guide people.
Yeah, 100%. It's trying to create a safe enough space of non-judgment where you can really coax the person out of themselves. You want the person to understand their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors, their habits. It's like you said, a sounding board and a mirror to what's actually going on for them. If we think day to day how we have to show up in any given situation, in our relationship, as a parent, as an employee, in the job that we have, as a business owner, there's so many different things that we have to be for other people, but ultimately, who are we for ourselves first?
Definitely, definitely. There's a lot of points there. I, one of the questions that I always ask guests is, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self? And you mentioned to me that your 20s was full of partying, traveling. Your 30s was a lot of investing,
Mm.
properties, and now your early 40s is about business growth. So if you were to go back to that 20-year-old kid who was probably lost to an extent, what would
Mm.
you say to him?
Yeah, I remember having this epiphany moment when I was 23 years old. I was just walking down the street. I was living in Keswick at the time in the Lake District, in a pretty good place. And I had this moment of realization that no one knows what the fuck they're doing. Like, no one knows. Do you think there's this transition period between being a child and being an adult when all of a sudden everything will make sense? And it's that realization of why, wow, everyone's just trying to figure stuff out. So I think the message that I'd say to myself is don't worry, just try stuff, see what happens and see what resonates for you. And it doesn't matter if you fail, like you'll get to where you need to go eventually.
So just looking at that boy at 23 who was thinking no one really knows where they're going. I remember talking to an old client of mine, and he said it just feels like everyone around here is making up as they go along. I'm not looking for that. And I remember then him saying about a year later the exact opposite. Probably just went through a journey himself and said life is just everyone making up as they go along. Do you think you've ever come to a point where you feel that you're not making up as you're going along?
Yeah, I'd say again about 5 years ago in my mid 30s, just actually getting a deeper sense of who I am, what my purpose is, and what I want to do with my life and how I'm showing up in each of my relationships. Yeah, it took me until my mid 30s to understand that. And everybody's different. People realize it at different times in their lives, maybe due to different traumas or experiences that they've had or the way they've been raised. But I think there is a moment in life, and it's different for everyone, when they actually realize that.
What would you say your purpose is now?
To help other people while still looking after myself. So what I mean by that is the analogy of, you see it in a plane, putting your own mask on first before helping somebody else with theirs.
Why do you think so often that people struggle to find their purpose?
I don't think we're really taught about it in school or by our parents.
And if you can make the school curriculum, what would the 10 subjects you'd put in be?
So yeah, 10 subjects that I'd have in schools. Probably self-awareness, emotional regulation.
What can you expand on emotional regulation?
Yeah, so it's okay to have different emotions. I think as men we're taught to only show emotions in certain situations or certain types of emotions. So like dominance or aggression or success. We try and shut down sadness or fear. So actually allowing all people, men and women, to feel the full spectrum of their emotions and to recognize that whatever response or reaction we have to a given situation is usually appropriate. But where does that emotion then spill into being non-healthy? So, for example, if we get angry at something, are we able to show anger in an appropriate way without becoming aggressive, dominant, abusive, or hindering somebody else in their process? Is it assertive anger? Are we able to be articulate? Are we able to communicate things that are challenging us in a way and to express them in a way that somebody else can understand it without moving into that negative end of the spectrum? It's that idea of giving yourself time and space to feel your emotions, but not getting lost in them and being in that hamster wheel inside your own mind.
So that's subject 2.
That's subject to. I'd say feedback as well. How do you give and receive feedback? Most of us don't know how to take feedback. We take it as a personal attack or a slight on our character. But any piece of feedback you're given is a golden opportunity. If you think about feedback as your blind spots, things that you're not aware of, any piece of feedback that somebody gives you is an opportunity for you to think, okay, how am I showing up in a situation? What's working? What isn't working? How does that affect other people? Is that my responsibility or is that their responsibility? And then it's an opportunity for change and for growth to happen.
So with feedback, because if I'm being very honest, I think I struggle to appropriately take feedback. What advice would you just personally give to me to say this is how you can receive it better?
Yeah, sure. So I did some management and leadership training about 10 years ago, and I was introduced to this fantastic concept of feedback called DJAC. And it's an acronym, and it basically states that when somebody gets feedback, they, again, if they've not very well adapted to feedback, they generally get defensive, emotional, and then justify their behavior straight off the bat. They'll be very reactive in somebody's feedback that they're receiving. But if you're able to pause and reflect in that moment and really try and hear what the other person is saying, and then maybe getting or taking accountability for that, then you can move into the acceptance and the change part of that. But it's really thinking about, what is that feedback like? Is it somebody just having a go at you and they're not being specific about something, or are they giving you something very specific in that feedback? It's really easy for us to get defensive and emotional, and I've done it plenty of times. When I've received feedback, when I've not been in a place where I feel secure in myself or I feel like I'm being personally attacked. And it takes situational awareness as well to think, okay, is this person trying to give me some constructive feedback, or are they just attacking me and not taking responsibility for their own actions?
Nice. I'll look into that. So
Yeah, it's a good one.
the acronym was FEEJAC.
No, DJAC,
EJAC.
DEJAC.
Okay, you do.
Yeah.
Cool. And what other lessons would you put on the curriculum there? This is the School of Chalfont.
School of Chalfont. Sex education would be a massive one for me. a really, really big one. I'd change the entire curriculum around sex education. In my work as a therapist, I work a lot with issues of sex, sexuality, identity, porn addiction. There's a lot of shame and guilt and embarrassment around sex, around masturbation, around kinks, desires, functionality, the way that we are perceiving ourselves, the ideas that we kind of come up with that we think other people want in relation to sex. So I think it's safe to say that most people self-educate through porn, and porn isn't realistic to life. Where are the real honest conversations that we're having around sex, from parent to child, from teachers to children, in the education system. Certainly when I was at school, it was all just around functionality. It's just the biomechanics of it, of not getting an STD, and that was kind of it. Sex is an entire language in and of itself. How do we talk about it? How do we communicate it? How do we think about our own bodies and how we feel pleasure? How do we consider eliciting pleasure in somebody else through our actions and our behaviors and our words, and touch? It's a huge one. So sex is definitely like high up on the curriculum for me, because it's a fundamental part of life. If we take ourselves down to our core aspects, we're meant to procreate, and there's still so much shame and embarrassment and guilt around it. And in my opinion, there shouldn't be. It's the most natural thing in the world.
I mean, sex is how everyone in this world was created, more or less. Obviously, some people through IVF, but 99% of the population is through sex. And as you said, most of the lads that I know, it's just 13, 14, discover about having your first wank, and that's it for you. And then everything else. And I remember learning, I think it was sex education in year 3, so I was 8 years old, and everyone's immature. They're just going ooh in front of the video that they're playing. And I think you do 2 sex education lessons a year.
Yeah.
It's just made out to be this massive joke, when in reality, is a teacher really trained to teach sex education, or should it be a sex education expert who comes in that no one's ever met, who understands what this is? Because I also think the job of a primary school teacher, I think they do an amazing job, but they're expected to know something about everything: maths, English, geography, history, and then you just we'll just throw sex education into the mix there. So that's a different view to think of stuff.
100%, yeah, and I completely agree. You've got so many different people in society, so many different religions, beliefs. It's a huge subject to explore. So like you said, the job of a teacher, it's vast. They've got so much on their shoulders that they have to try and communicate, so many children that they have to cater for, neurodiversity, religion, societal differences. It's an absolute minefield to try and navigate. So like you were saying, sorry, having an expert come in and maybe having a couple of different people, like 2 men, 2 women, each speaking from a place of lived experience, maybe having something on the curriculum where you can ask any question that you want without fear of judgment or blame or being shut down, which speaks to very real life experiences and what it's like, what it's like to lose your virginity as a man, as a woman, what it's like if you're gay or trans or non-binary, trying to create that place of safety, similarly to counseling, where you can explore all of these things without fear of asking the wrong question or feel like you're making a fool of yourself.
And what other subjects, to wrap up the list, would you add in? Do you add in the conventional maths, English?
Yeah, probably, but I did really badly in maths and English. They were really difficult subjects for me because of my dyslexia. But yeah, obviously we do need them. I'd probably say something around problem solving, failure and success. What are failure and success? What do they look like? Everyone talks about success, but they don't realize that the road is paved with failure. You'll fail more times in your life than you will succeed. And mindset is a skill. And how do you train that mindset? And again, critical thought. How are we able to question something and challenge it if we don't agree with it? Is it safe for us to even do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I sat down with my brother about 2.5 years ago. He met me after training, and he was saying, oh, I want to start this business and I want to try this, etc., etc. And I said to him, I hope you fail. And he looked at me like, what on earth are you talking about? And then we expanded and we spoke, and I just said, I'd rather you try loads of things and just consistently fail than you just turn around and become a success instantly. Because I think a lot of times you get something right, it goes to your head, and
Yeah,
then boom, you just think, you develop such an ego, you think it's like your shit doesn't stink, and you get these people who they capture the right things, like lightning in a bottle. They hit the right. It's just the timing is perfect, and I
yeah,
think one of the biggest factors in business and life towards success is timing. You've caught something at the right time, and then you try to gloss it up. And I don't even think you do it consciously. I think it's all subconscious, whereby you look at yourself and you think, "I am the dog's bollocks. I have got this right first time." And then because it was so good the first time, you can navigate that. It works second, third time, and
yeah,
that's it. You develop this huge ego, and it gives you this full sense of security that things work. And I remember listening to an entrepreneur that said his first two businesses were ultra successful. So what did he do? He got all of the money he made from those first two businesses,
yeah,
threw it into his third, lost everything. And I think that is a lesson and an example of, if you're too successful too early, then it gives you that full sense of security whereby you become oblivious to failure.
yeah. 100%. It's like I know so many people that had that experience in life. Been self-made millionaires or inherited from their family, and they've never made a mistake. They've been handed every opportunity to them. And then others who've again become millionaires but lost absolutely everything and had to start from scratch again.
Yeah, I think probably the big generational opportunity right now is cryptocurrencies. And
Mm.
you hear of these lads who turn around. uh, I know a friend of a friend who,
I wouldn't say there's an exact moment, but I think over the course of like 18 months, 2 years, it was this realization that I was just feeling more solid and yeah, just showing up in a more authentic way. And it's because I had so many new male relationships and friendships and all these models of masculinity, which were really healthy around me. Men of different ages, different demographics, different lived experiences and traumas, and just seeing how they were showing up authentically with vulnerability, with compassion, with empathy, and unapologetically being themselves. Mm.
nice, good for you. And I guess with a lot of men and people in general, they're working to become something that they would like to become more of, and they haven't become it, or they're struggling to become it.
Mm.
And I think someone, if they can listen to that, they can take a lot of guidance from it, because at times becoming who you want to be does not happen in one eureka moment where, as you said, you're
Yeah.
walking down the street and you realize everyone's making up as they go along. Sometimes processes take a decade long, and the person you want to become, you realize maybe even when you become them, it isn't everything that it's made out to be at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that thing of in school again, when I'm taught about repetition, consistency, habits, these are fundamental to how our life is going to turn out.
So, a question that I love asking people, because it's just I'm a bit bookworm. I question is what are your top three book recommendations?
God, that's a hard one. Just to try and limit it to three. One that really sticks out is Rich Dad Poor Dad.
We've
I
had
think
that
it's
quite a
by
few
Robert
times recently.
Kiyosaki. Yeah, that was really amazing. Starting that journey of actual growth. That was one of the first kind of self-help books I read on being rich and money. Another one is The Untethered Soul.
Okay, who's that by?
Let me just make this. Let's have a look. Michael Singer.
Okay,
Yeah, it's the idea that our thoughts aren't necessarily our reality. So if we have a negative inner voice or a positive inner voice, how do we disconnect from our thoughts? How do we just recognize, like, it's kind of meditative, you know, It's this concept of like monkey mind. Are our thoughts just dominating our headspace all the time, or are we able to become the observer in what's actually going on inside our own heads? And then the third book is called Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. And that's a really interesting one. Mindset is a skill that we can train. And she's got some great acknowledgements and just, concepts around mindset and what we can do to actually develop that.
Powerful. So this part of the podcast, I have taken a question from the internet, and this is from a fellow entrepreneur. So a fellow entrepreneur asked, what can men do to become more well-rounded individuals and find their purpose in life?
Maybe asking themselves the questions, what are you not being honest with yourself about? Yeah, that's a really powerful question to ask. What are you not being honest with yourself about? And then taking radical responsibility and accountability for what are you doing to change that? Because ultimately, nothing will change until you do. So it all comes back to self-awareness.
Oh, okay. Well, we're throwing it back on that person there.
Yeah, for me, it's all about your podcast. It's growth. How can we reflect on what's working for us, what isn't working for us, how we're showing up, and taking that accountability for ourselves. Again, going back to the education system, how much of what you learn in school is relevant to your day-to-day life? What subjects really do you use on a day-to-day basis? And then, okay, what do you want your life to look like? And how do you have to educate yourself on those subjects?
Good questions to ask. I definitely say this podcast has made me just look at things in a more, not critical light, but taking a bit more of a step back and just giving myself the ability to think. And I think what you mentioned about what you did in 2018-19, taking 8 months off, and I guess I'm curious to know, what did you do in those 8 months?
Well, I was very fortunate because I had the support of my partner. So financially, he really looked after us through that time. And I just sat with feelings, sat with emotions, some of them incredibly challenging at times. And again, went and saw friends, asked for that feedback, did research into different professions that I was looking into, different ideas and concepts. People who are social media influencers or doctors or researchers, just any bit of information which I was slightly curious about, drilling down on it and seeing, okay, what's the real roots behind that? What works, what doesn't work, what resonates with me, and trying to figure out that path forward.
Nice. I think it's very telling that you did that. And I had a moment last year where, admittedly, things got really overwhelming and I wasn't in a good space. And I'd say I was still running the agency, but it's when I came up with my second business, coaching business, whereby I really took a step back and thought, what is it I really, really want to do? What fires me? And similar to what you said, I think if you can engineer a business or a job for yourself, where of course there's going to be shit bits in any job and you're just like, I've got to do this. But if you can find something that really aligns with you, a lot of it just feels like play and it feels like new learnings consistently. And what I realized is probably the area of what I love most about my businesses now is having the ability every single day. I went on a 6 kilometer walk this morning and I'll joke around with people and say I don't work anymore, but I know when I'm on these walks, I'm thinking. And in order to grow my businesses, I need time to think, to put on the right podcasts, to set aside half an hour every day to read. Book that I'm reading right now, it's probably one of the dullest books I've ever read. It's Competitive Strategy by Michael Porter. But I know for me, my competitors and other people in the industry are not reading these books and are not thinking in that way. But it's that kind of mindset of just becoming 1% better. And I think whenever I speak with younger guys and just friends that I think I've got a lot of friends that think, geez, mate, you're doing really well. You're really ballsy. You quit your job at 24 to take your business full time. And I think I just had it with the courage of knowing that I will spend every single day trying to learn and trying to grow. And as long as I can do that, then yeah, some days are going to be better than others, but I know that I can give it 100%. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of young men and just people in general who are in positions where they'd probably be better off if they just quit their job and took their business full time, because the worst case scenario is, yeah, you lose the opportunity cost of earning more money in the next year too, but at least you've tried to give it a go. And I've got a few friends who are in the position right now where they're doing so, and I'm so excited for them.
Yeah, nice. And it's that fear, isn't it? It's taking that leap into the unknown.
Taking the steps back in order to propel yourself forward.
Yeah, 100%. And what have you noticed in that journey since you did that?
I feel as though I'm fearless. I mentioned to you I was at a wedding this weekend, and I saw a guy who I haven't seen for a good 5 and a bit years. And as with social media, we've got each other on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and we were in a wider group, and someone talking about what he was doing. And then just in a really nice, authentic, candid way, he switched over. He said, "Oh, but what Joe's doing is more interesting." And I've never liked the spotlight when it comes down to that, to turn around and just big myself up, push my ego and say, yeah, I'm doing all of these things. But I've tried to, and one of my clients, she actually taught me this. She said, be proud of what you're doing. So if you're doing something well, people know when you're just trying to say something to enhance your ego, whereas you can just say something which is the truth in a really candid way. And I spoke a little bit about what I'm doing, and he just said, I really admire the fact that you've just gone for it. And I really think I've just developed a massive I don't give a fuck attitude that, okay, I'm going to fail. But similarly to what I said to my brother, I hope you fail. I feel quite masochistic now in the sense of every time I fail, it's me learning something new about myself. And it's sort of like I'm wearing this body armor and I'm just putting another layer on here and another layer on here. And it's making me more resilient, stronger, more courageous. And I think my stress tolerance has never been higher. And similarly to Conrad, I love stuff like jujitsu because it puts you in really uh, hard, suppressive, submissive spots where you're thinking, okay, and a lot of these positions, you just have to calm yourself down. It's about nerve regulations where you're in a really tough position and you have to think, how do I find the solution to this problem? And I think a large majority of life is just figuring out problems, problem solving. So similarly, what you were saying about what subjects would you choose in school, it's and I've got friends who run businesses who their anxiety is up here. And I just think, mate, is the cost actually worth it for you? Because you're here and yeah, you're making more money than me, but you can't sleep at night. You're consistently anxious about what's happening. You're in a mindset of when is this going to fail? And it's probably not worth the cost for you. So that's probably what I found. And I think I've just learned how to just calm myself down in so many situations.
Yeah. And again, like you said, jiu-jitsu just being that catalyst for you, forcing you into those moments of extreme challenge, dominant, submissive. How do you get out of those situations? How do you, like you said, regulate in that moment your nervous system, your emotions, and think, okay, what's the way forward?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's jiu-jitsu for me, but for you, it could be rock climbing or canoeing, and that's it. And the way how I try to look at it now is, in life, there's two types of suffering. There's chosen suffering, there's unchosen suffering. Unchosen suffering, we never know when it's going to happen. And generally, in life, people experience 5 traumas throughout their life. And it's probably the case of you hit your 20s onwards, that's generally where it starts to happen. The first 20 years, for most people, they don't experience massive, massive trauma. And then you've got chosen suffering. And I think what I see amongst a lot of people my age is that they're consistently looking for paths where they don't experience any chosen suffering, where all they want to do is finish work, close to 5 o'clock as possible, go for their drinks or go home and put the TV on. And I can quite proudly say right now, I don't have a Netflix subscription. I just got an Amazon Prime subscription just because I was ordering stuff from there, and it just worked out to, I think it was $8.99 for the month that I could get my deliveries and use the TV. And the only show that I've watched on there is SAS Who Dares Wins, and shock, that is all about chosen suffering. And it's the only thing that I've gravitated towards on that list. And that's it. And I think I would love, and maybe this is where communities and men's retreats like yours, Men's Retreats UK, can come in and help people, because some people don't have the confidence, like myself, to just say, fuck it, I'm just going to put myself in the deep zone. For instance, in about 6 weeks' time, I'm moving out to South America. And when I was talking to people, I don't speak Spanish, but I've got Google Translate. And I said to myself, I need to do this. And I went to Central America for 2 months early this year. Before I was going, I was speaking to my mum, and I said, I don't know, I've got a bad feeling about this. And she said to me, okay, well, don't go. And at that moment, I knew I had to go, because I thought, no, that's the problem.
Yeah,
you grow when you're uncomfortable. So if I go out to South America, good, bad, indifferent, it's, for me, it's two things happen. The exact same thing happens to two people. One person sees this as good, one person sees this as bad. It's just all perspective.
Yeah, 100%. And I really resonate that as well. Like, I went traveling when I was a youngster, and it's scary as hell to put yourself in that situations of new countries, different dialects, different languages, different people. And it's like, things will get thrown at you, and you'll think, holy shit, how do I get out of this? Or what's the solution? But it's all growth, and it's recognizing that it's the journey, not the destination. You know, that old saying. It's like, again, coming back to this idea of subjects in schools, life will throw things at you that you have no idea of what you're going to do, how they're going to challenge you, and they will rock you to your absolute core. And school does not prepare you for any of that. You know, so how do we prepare ourselves for those moments? Like you said, it's that chosen suffering or the inevitable suffering that we will all face at different points in our life. And it's those moments that really test you, and you realize the kind of person that you are. And it's how can you do those in ways which aren't going to be traumatic, but will really push you outside of your comfort zone, into that stretch zone, but not quite into the danger zone. You know, and for some people, they do want to go in the danger zone, you know, bungee jumping, paragliding, rock climbing. You know, it's one of those. It's like, how do you step into those areas, but without putting your life on the line, or having a certain amount of measured risk? And how risk averse are you? Like you said, for some people, they just want the easy option all the time. And mostly because they don't feel that they have the resources to manage those situations, because they've never been tested in a certain way, or they've always just been given the easy option out. You know, and I know that applies to me and a large portion of my life as well. Even though on paper I've gone off and done different things like traveling or extreme sports or jumping out of a plane or something, stepping into different challenges in different areas of your life. How do you do that, or how do you shy away from it?
I've got a saying or a mantra. I've actually got a book here of mantras that I live by. And I remember writing this down 3 months ago. I was in the garden of a coffee shop, and I just wrote a load of internal actualization thoughts. But one of them is, whenever you're faced with two decisions, always take the harder one.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
And it's easier said than done. And at times, an easy example is you're on a run and you're saying to yourself, should I do 5 or 6K? Well, you know what the right answer is. And don't get me wrong, sometimes you're at 4.5 kilometers and your knee is really bad, and you realize, actually, this is going to do more harm than good.
Yeah.
And I was in this position about 6 weeks ago. I tore my meniscus and went for a threshold session, and I had an operation on it 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Did this run, and I was in pain for another 3 more weeks. And I just thought, okay, that's the time where your ego is there. Sometimes you tell it to shut up and just say, actually, no, I'm just going to go on the bike for half an hour instead and do all the work there. So I guess it's getting smarter and wiser. But it is the case of, there's probably loads of moments in life where you realize actually it's just a fear bubble. And Ant Milderson, he wrote a really good book on it called The Fear Bubble,
Mm.
and I think that's one of the best books on mindset if you're just looking at pushing yourself forward. And fear is just, it's all, to my opinion, internally manufactured and engineered. And of course, you wouldn't get in a river with a crocodile because that's just stupid. And you should have fear for predators and animals. But there are things that you can control and you choose not to lean into just because it's easy.
Yeah, it really brings to mind that film with Will Smith and his son. I can't remember what it's called, but there's a line in the film that says, "Danger is real, and fear is a choice," and it's recognizing the difference between fear and danger, and recognizing, yeah, how do you have situational awareness to step into those moments, and also to recognize what's your ego and what isn't, what's
Mm-hmm,
just wanting the easy way out.
definitely. Christian, what have you got planned for Men's Retreat UK over the next year?
Yeah, so putting on a lot more retreats. We tried to make it more financially accessible to a lot of guys. So we're going to be running a hell of a lot more single day retreats throughout the Northwest. And we're going to look at different venues up and down the country as well. But we also have weekend retreats and week-long retreats that we're looking at as well. But yeah, just greater opportunities for guys to engage in community and to give them the skills and the tools just to become more reflective, more self-aware, and also to cultivate that resilience and give them a greater sense of community. So yeah, we've got a lot of exciting stuff happening in the next 12 months. So I'm pretty excited for it.
Exciting, exciting. And where can people find you?
Sure. So people can find us on Instagram, just Men's Retreats UK. They can also find me personally on LinkedIn. And yeah, like I said, I work as a counselor as well. So any of those two platforms, they can reach me.
Christian, thank you so much for your time. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure as well. Thank you for having me.